June 14, 2026, 01:12 a.m. Taganrog Bay, on the shore of the Sea of Azov. A security guard named Private Ilya Kozlov is finishing his second coffee of the shift. 12 hours, same fence line, same floodlights, same silence. He's watched this stretch of coastline for 8 months, and nothing has ever happened here. He carries a standard-issue AKS-74. He has fired exactly twice, both times at a qualification range, and a handheld thermal scope that's been due for recalibration since March. His post log for the night reads like every other post log for the night. Wind speed, visibility, nothing to report. Then, the floodlights flicker. Not a power cut, something faster. A shadow crosses the beam at low altitude, wings level. Engine barely louder than a lawnmower 2 fields over. Kozlov reaches for his radio. His hand is shaking before he says a word. He keys the mic twice before anything comes out. And what finally comes out isn't procedure. It's just, I see something. I see something over the water. Behind him, past 3 checkpoints and a razor wire perimeter, sits a hangar the Russian Ministry of Defense has spent years trying to keep out of satellite chatter. Inside it, the Beriev A-100 Premier, Russia's answer to airborne radar dominance. The aircraft meant to replace the aging A-50 fleet and give Moscow eyes over the entire front. Nobody inside that hangar believes, yet, that tonight is the night it burns. For 11 minutes, Kozlov's report sits in a queue behind 2 false alarms about seagulls. By the time anyone takes him seriously, 3 more shadows have already crossed the perimeter fence. This is the story of how they got there. 400 kilometers of contested airspace, threaded past some of the densest air defense coverage Russia has ever assembled, to reach one aircraft Moscow could not afford to lose twice. To understand why this raid mattered, you need to understand what almost happened 2.5 years earlier, over open water, 40 kilometers from this exact coastline. January 14th, 2024, a Russian A-50U airborne early warning aircraft, the predecessor to the A-100, a flying radar station worth an estimated $330 million, went down over the Sea of Azov. Ukrainian intelligence sources credited the loss to a long-range strike near Krasnodar airspace. Russia never fully explained it in public. The fleet was already down to a handful of operational airframes before that night. After it, Moscow had one urgent, expensive answer: get the A-100 into service faster. The Premier wasn't a modification. It was meant to be a generational leap. A Il-76 MD-90A airframe carrying the Vega complex radar system, capable of tracking hundreds of airborne targets at once and feeding that picture directly into Russian fighter squadrons. On paper, it could see an F-16 lift off from a Ukrainian runway before the pilot leveled out. There was a problem nobody wanted to say out loud inside the program. The Vega radar relied on components that sanctions had made difficult to source. Test flights that were supposed to happen in 2021 slipped to 2023. By mid-2026, engineers close to the program estimated the total sunk cost at somewhere north of $1.2 billion for a radar aircraft that had still not entered frontline service. 2 prototype airframes existed. One of them sat, most nights, inside a hangar at the Beriev plant in Taganrog. The plant chose that location on purpose. Rostov Oblast, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest stretch of contested front line. Layered air defense, S-400 batteries, Pantsir S-1 short-range systems, Buk M3 coverage rotating through the region, a location Russian planners considered close to untouchable. I spent a while going through open-source flight path analysis on this one, and one number kept nagging at me. 400 kilometers isn't a straight shot from anywhere Ukraine controls. It's a route. Someone planned every kilometer of it. That someone worked out of a windowless operations room run by Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, HER, The officer credited in later briefings with shaping the mission was a planning lead, using the working name Colonel Artem Dudchenko. His unit had spent the better part of 5 months building a target list of aircraft Russia considered irreplaceable. The A-100 sat near the top. The weapon they'd use was the Lyutyi, Ukrainian for fierce or furious, a long-range strike drone, first paraded publicly in 2024, built to fly over 1,000 kilometers on a pre-programmed route, low and slow, carrying a warhead in the neighborhood of 50 kilograms. Unit cost, by most public estimates, somewhere around $300,000. Against a $330 million aircraft, that math does something to people who think about war in terms of exchange ratios. Dudchenko's team didn't have satellite-guided precision on tap for the whole route. They had terrain, timing, and patience. Here's the complication that almost killed the mission before it started. 3 weeks before the strike, Russian electronic warfare units expanded a jamming belt along the northern Azov approach, aimed squarely at the kind of low-altitude drone corridor Dudchenko's team had already mapped. GPS spoofing, wideband jamming, exactly the kind of obstacle that turns a precision strike into an expensive miss. The team didn't scrap the plan. They rebuilt the guidance profile around inertial navigation and terrain contour matching, the same approach used on some long-range Ukrainian strikes further north. No live GPS signal required for most of the route. The drones would fly blind to jamming, correcting off stored terrain data instead of a satellite fix. It added weeks to preparation. It also meant the jamming belt Russia had just built would do almost nothing on the night that mattered. The launch window opened on the night of June 13th into June 14th. Weather over the Azov coast was clear, wind under 15 kilometers an hour, good flying conditions, and worse for anyone hoping bad weather would keep the sky empty. 11 Lyutyi drones lifted off from dispersed launch points inside Ukrainian-controlled territory between 11:40 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. They didn't fly in a straight line. The first wave crossed into contested airspace clean. No radar lock, no scramble order, nothing on Russian air defense logs for the first 90 minutes. It looked, for a while, like the hardest part was already over. It wasn't. 200 kilometers from Taganrog, a Pantsir S-1 battery near the town of Kagalnitskaya picked up an unidentified low-altitude contact and opened fire. That contact was drone number 7. The Pantsir crew got a hit. One Lyutyi went down in farmland outside Kagalnitskaya. Its wreckage photographed later by a local resident and posted, briefly, before being scrubbed from social media. 10 drones remained. The route had a built-in answer to exactly this scenario. Dudchenko's team had planned for losses, staggering the formation so that one intercept wouldn't expose the rest. It worked. The Pantsir crew reported the kill, logged the coordinates, and stood down. In the after-action paperwork later reviewed by open-source analysts, the battery commander logged the engagement as a single, unmanned aerial target, likely reconnaissance type, neutralized. No follow-up sweep was ordered. No adjacent batteries were alerted to widen their scan window. It was treated, on paper, as a solved problem rather than a warning shot. The kind of clerical shortcut that looks irrelevant right up until it isn't. Nobody escalated the search. 10 more shadows kept moving south toward the coast. There's a detail in the operational debrief that reads almost like an accident report from a different kind of disaster. The route from that point hugged the Azov coastline at under 100 meters altitude, low enough that radar coverage from inland S-400 batteries, built to track high-altitude bombers and cruise missiles, simply couldn't see them against the sea clutter. What strikes me about this part of the story is how ordinary the failure was. Nobody was outsmarted by some brilliant new technology. A radar system built for a different threat missed a slow, cheap, low target because nobody had reprogrammed the threat model. That's not a glitch. That's an entire air defense doctrine built around the wrong war. By 01:00 a.m., the 10 surviving drones were less than 30 kilometers from the Beriev plant, flying in a loose, staggered line along the coast. Private Kozlov's radio call at 01:12 wasn't the first warning. It was just the first one anybody believed. Here's the part that doesn't sit right with a lot of people who've looked closely at this raid. Taganrog isn't some remote military installation buried in Siberia. It sits on the coast, visible from Ukrainian-controlled Mariupol on a clear day. Russian planners knew it was reachable. They gambled on air defense density instead of relocating the program somewhere genuinely out of range. That's not bad luck. That's a decision someone signed off on. We'll say the part most defense analysts won't put plainly: keeping a $1.2 billion radar program 40 kilometers from a hostile coastline, protected mainly by systems tuned for a different kind of threat, wasn't caution. It was an unforced error dressed up as strategic depth. Would you have made that call, knowing what happened to the A-50U 18 months earlier over the exact same stretch of water? Something to sit with. At 01:19 a.m., the first drone crossed the plant's outer fence line. Kozlov's report had reached the duty officer by then, but the response, a scramble order to a nearby Pantsir detachment stationed inside city limits, needed 9 minutes to get a battery tracking and cleared to fire near residential buildings. 9 minutes was more than enough. The Pantsir crew got their radar lock at 01:26. One inbound drone, destroyed in the air above a parking lot half a kilometer from the hangar complex. The explosion lit up windows across 3 city blocks, and, for a moment, it looked like the defense had actually worked in time. It hadn't. Behind that intercepted drone, 3 more were already on final approach from a different bearing. The staggered formation splitting exactly the way Dudchenko's team had designed it to. At 01:28, the first impact hit the hangar roof. Witnesses in nearby apartment blocks described 2 distinct detonations, roughly 40 seconds apart. Security camera footage that circulated briefly on Russian telegram channels, later taken down, showed a fireball rising above the plant's northern structure, followed by a secondary explosion consistent with fuel or ordnance cooking off inside. By 01:31, 3 of the 10 remaining drones had struck within the plant perimeter. 2 more were shot down by Pantsir and Buk M3 fire in the minutes after, their wreckage scattering across a residential street and a stretch of shoreline. 5 drones never made contact, either downed, lost to navigation error, or diverted by the crews on the ground once the alarm was fully raised. Here's what nobody at the plant expected. The hangar housing the A-100 prototype wasn't the first building hit. It was the second. The initial impact struck an adjacent structure, later identified in satellite imagery as a parts and avionics storage building. For about 90 seconds, it's possible the aircraft itself was still untouched. Then the second detonation hit closer, and thermal imagery captured by a commercial satellite, passed roughly 6 hours later, showed scorched damage extending across the roofline of the hangar where the Premier had been parked for maintenance. Colonel Grigory Osin, the plant's on-site security chief, filed an incident report, time-stamped 02:40 a.m. Independent satellite analysis, released 4 days later by an open-source imagery group, placed visible structural damage, collapsed roofing, char patterns consistent with fire, debris scattering across both buildings. A maintenance technician, who asked not to be named in a later interview with an independent Russian outlet, described being pulled off the hangar floor by a colleague less than 2 minutes before the first impact, after a supervisor ordered an unscheduled break for reasons nobody explained to the crew at the time. Whether that order came from advance warning, a coincidence, or a nervous duty officer acting on Kozlov's report, finally moving through the chain, nobody involved has said on the record. The technician's account has not been independently verified, but it's the closest thing to a first-hand voice from inside that building that has surfaced publicly. Whether the A-100 airframe inside was destroyed outright or merely damaged became the single most contested detail of the following week. Russian state media said nothing for the first 36 hours. When the Ministry of Defense finally issued a statement, it described the incident as a fire resulting from a technical malfunction during scheduled maintenance work at an unnamed industrial facility in Rostov Oblast. No mention of drones, no mention of the plant by name, no mention of the aircraft. That framing lasted less than 2 days. Independent Russian military bloggers, the same mill bloggers who've broken cover-up stories before, at real professional risk to themselves, began posting satellite crops and eyewitness photos within hours of the state statement. One post, since deleted, read simply, "An industrial accident does not leave interceptor debris on Petrovskaya Street." It was shared over 40,000 times before being pulled. By day 3, the story had a name attached to it that Russian officials clearly hadn't wanted attached, Taganrog, and a second name, harder still to walk back, A-100. Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence issued a brief public statement crediting a long-range precision strike against aviation infrastructure in Rostov Oblast. It stopped short of confirming the A-100 by name, standard practice for an agency that prefers ambiguity over bragging rights it can't fully verify. Privately, officials speaking to journalists on condition of anonymity described the target as the most valuable single airframe struck this year. The most surprising part of the aftermath isn't the strike itself, it's what happened to the cover story. Within a week, Yevgeny Panov, the plant's technical director, was quietly reassigned to an advisory post outside Rostov Oblast, the kind of transfer that in Russian defense industry circles usually signals someone is being made to answer for a failure without a public trial. No formal disciplinary announcement followed. He simply stopped appearing in plant correspondence. Colleagues who spoke to independent outlets described Panov as the person who had personally lobbied, twice, for additional Pantsir coverage, closer to the hangar complex itself, rather than relying on batteries stationed inside the city. Both requests were denied by regional command as an unnecessary expense for a facility already inside a secure zone. If that account holds up, the man reassigned for the failure may have been the one person on record who saw it coming and couldn't get anyone above him to sign off on the fix. Here's what this tells us about the broader picture. The A-50U loss in January 2024 was treated, publicly, as an isolated tragedy. Bad luck. A single aircraft caught in the wrong place. This strike broke that narrative for good. It hit the very program built to replace the capability Russia lost that night, in the same stretch of coastline, using the same layered defenses that were supposed to have learned the lesson. One detail from the debrief has stuck with me since I first read it. Among the wreckage catalogued by open-source researchers was a section of drone fuselage bearing a stenciled serial number, partially burned, that matched a batch of Lyutyi units reportedly produced in the first quarter of 2026. Whoever built that specific airframe had no way of knowing, months earlier on a factory floor, that it would end its flight 400 kilometers from where it launched, inside the perimeter of Russia's most protected aircraft program. There's something almost unbearably ordinary about that. A drone assembled on a production line becomes, months later, the reason a $1.2 billion radar program loses a year of progress in under 3 minutes. For a few days, it looked like the story might end there. A damaged hangar, a reassigned director, a state media statement nobody believed. Then, a second commercial satellite pass, captured 11 days after the strike, showed something that hadn't been in the first images. The hangar roof, still open to the sky, and no sign that repair work had begun. Whatever was under that roof on June 14th, Russia wasn't in a hurry to move it. rebuild around it, or show anyone what remained. Defense analysts who reviewed the imagery split into two camps almost immediately. One group argued the damage pattern was consistent with the A-100 prototype being a near-total loss, citing the extended roof exposure and absence of any aircraft movement in follow-up passes. The other pointed out that Russia had strong incentive to leave a damaged hangar looking worse than it was, simply to avoid signaling the airframe had survived and was being quietly relocated for repair. Neither side has definitive proof. That's the honest answer, and it's less satisfying than a clean verdict, but it's where the evidence actually sits, as of this recording. What isn't in dispute? The A-100 program, already years behind schedule, lost weeks, if not months, of testing time it did not have to spare. Russia's airborne radar coverage over the front, already thin after the A-50U losses, got thinner, and a facility Moscow had treated as functionally untouchable proved it wasn't. Put yourself in Kozlov's position for a second. 8 months of an uneventful posting, then 90 seconds where a shadow crossing a floodlight beam turns into the reason a billion-dollar program ends up in foreign intelligence briefings. He filed his report. Nobody believed him fast enough. That gap, 11 minutes between the first radio call and anyone treating it as real, may be the most human detail in the entire operation. Not a failure of technology, a failure of somebody trusting the person watching the fence. According to the same account from the maintenance technician, Kozlov was questioned for nearly 6 hours the following day by plant security, not as a suspect, but because nobody could explain how a private on his second coffee of a routine night shift had clocked the threat faster than the system built to catch it. We cut a few of the more granular intercept details from this account for length, specifically the exact staggering intervals between drone waves, which remain only partially confirmed. If that's the piece you're most curious about, say so in the comments, and we'll dig further into it for a follow-up. So, where does this leave things? The A-100 Premier, Russia's answer to a radar gap it couldn't afford, sits somewhere between damaged and destroyed. Its exact status still locked behind Kremlin silence and a reassigned director who isn't talking. The jamming belt built to stop exactly this kind of raid never fired a shot that mattered, and the coastline Russia treated as safe enough to park its most expensive prototype now has a very different reputation among the people who plan these missions. 400 kilometers, 11 drones. One aircraft Russia could not afford to lose twice. They lost it anyway. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the ones nobody's covering with full details, pieced together from satellite imagery, intercepted comms, and the people willing to talk about what they saw, that's exactly what this channel exists for. Subscribe if you want the next one when it breaks. Drop a comment with what you think really happened inside that hangar. And if you haven't seen how Ukraine's Lyutyi drones reached Olenya Air Base 1,800 kilometers from the border, that one's next in your feed. We'll see you in the next raid.